3 different trips, 3 completely different places, and 3 moments where everything could have ended in seconds. What makes these stories worse isn't what happened. It's how normal everything felt right before it did. A quiet cabin in the middle of nowhere, a crowded club in a foreign city, a party house filled with people who seemed just like you. Nothing about those situations felt dangerous at first. No warning signs that stood out. No obvious red flags screaming at them to leave. And that's exactly what makes them terrifying. Because danger doesn't always look like danger. Sometimes it looks like a good deal, a fun night, or an invitation you didn't question enough. And by the time something feels off, you're already in it. These aren't just stories to entertain you. They're the kind of moments that stick with people for the rest of their lives. The kind that make you question every decision you make after. So before we get into this, make sure you subscribe, because the next story might be the one you don't see coming. It was spring break about 4 years ago when my girlfriend Anna suggested we do something different. No crowded beaches, no loud parties, just a quiet escape. She had been talking about renting a cabin deep in the woods for months, somewhere we could disappear for a few days with no obligations. Her brother Hunter was already staying with us at the time, so he decided to come along. I found the place online late one night. It looked perfect, secluded, surrounded by trees, and far enough from everything to feel like a reset. The only thing that didn't make sense was the price. It was way cheaper than anything else in the area. I remember hovering over the booking button, thinking it was a little too good to be true, but I clicked it anyway. The drive there felt longer than it should have. As we left the main roads behind, the scenery changed. Fewer houses, fewer cars, fewer signs of life. Eventually it was just trees, endless walls of trees on both sides of a narrow winding road. By the time we pulled up to the cabin, the sun was already starting to set, casting long shadows through the forest. The place looked exactly like the pictures. Small, wooden, tucked into the trees like it didn't want to be found. What stood out immediately was how cut off it felt. From the front porch, you couldn't even see the road we came in on. It was like the forest had swallowed it. Off to the side of the property was a large outbuilding, something between a shed and a small garage. It looked older than the cabin itself, but the padlock on the door was new. Too new. Hunter noticed it right away. He walked over, grabbed it, and jiggled it a bit before saying it had definitely been replaced recently. I joked that maybe the owner had something valuable in there and didn't want renters snooping around. At the time, it felt like a harmless detail. Now, I think it was the first warning sign we ignored. Inside, the cabin felt normal, comfortable even. It had that warm, rustic vibe that makes you feel like you're on a real getaway. We unpacked, made a simple dinner, and tried to relax after the drive. Later that night, we sat out on the porch with a couple drinks. The forest came alive after dark in a way I wasn't expecting. The sound was constant. Frogs, insects, leaves shifting in the wind. It wasn't quiet at all, but there was something calming about it, like a steady background noise that made everything else fade away. At some point, a light rain started falling, soft enough to blend into everything else. Right before going to sleep, I remember hearing something else out there, something heavier than the usual forest noise. It wasn't close enough to see, but it moved with purpose. Slow, deliberate steps through wet leaves. I told myself it was probably a deer, something harmless. That's what made the most sense. Still, I stayed awake for a few extra minutes, listening, before eventually drifting off. I don't know how long I had been asleep when the first sound woke me up. It was loud and sudden, a solid thump against the side of the cabin. My eyes snapped open, and I lay there completely still, trying to figure out if I had imagined it. The room was dark, the only light coming from faint moonlight through the window. I held my breath listening. For a moment there was nothing, just the rain and the distant hum of the forest. Then it happened again. Another thump. Same place, same force. My heart started pounding instantly. I turned my head and looked at Anna. She was still asleep, completely unaware. That meant it was on me. Every instinct told me to stay in bed and ignore it, but I couldn't. If something or someone was out there, I needed to know. Slowly, I got up and grabbed one of the flashlights we had brought. I moved carefully, trying not to make noise, and walked toward the window. I didn't want to go outside, not yet. So I stayed inside and tried to see what I could from there. The visibility was bad, especially with the rain. But as I scanned the ground near the outbuilding, something caught my eye. Footprints. They were faint, but they were there, pressed into the wet ground, leading toward the shed. I stared at them, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. They were fresh. There was no way they had been there earlier, and they definitely weren't ours. None of us had stepped outside since the rain started. My mind scrambled for an explanation. Maybe Hunter had gone out without telling us. Maybe I just hadn't noticed. But even as I thought it, I knew it didn't feel right. The shape of the prints didn't look like an animal's. They looked human. A cold feeling settled in my chest. I backed away from the window and went through the cabin, double-checking every lock, doors, windows, everything. Once I was sure we were secure, I went back to bed. But sleep didn't come easy after that. Every small sound felt amplified. Every creak of the wood made my heart jump. At some point, I must have drifted off again, because the next thing I remember is waking up to a different sound. Knocking, slow, deliberate, coming from the front door. I checked the time on my phone. 4 a.m. For a second, I just lay there staring at the ceiling, trying to process what I was hearing. Then the knocking came again, louder this time, more urgent. Anna woke up beside me, her voice shaking as she asked what that was. I didn't answer. I didn't have one. I got out of bed and walked toward the door, each step feeling heavier than the last. My heart was racing so hard I could hear it in my ears. Before I could even say anything, a voice came from the other side. "Forest Ranger," he said. "There's been an incident in the area. I need to do a welfare check." Something about it felt wrong immediately. The tone, the timing, everything. I hesitated, then told him through the door that we were fine and didn't need anything. I said we were just trying to sleep. There was a pause, long enough to make me think he might leave. But then he spoke again. "I still need to ask you a few questions." That's when the unease turned into something sharper. Fear. Hunter had come up behind me at that point, fully awake. I leaned toward him and whispered for him to call the police. He nodded and quietly stepped away while I kept talking. I gave the man vague answers, trying not to escalate anything while also not giving him reason to stay. A minute later, Hunter came back and whispered that the police said no rangers had been sent to the area. That confirmed it. The man outside wasn't who he said he was. It was like he could sense the shift in my confidence. His voice changed. It got louder, more aggressive. The knocking turned into pounding. He started demanding that I open the door, threatening to kick it down and arrest me if I didn't comply. The words didn't even make sense anymore. It was all intimidation. Anna shouted from behind me, telling him to go away. That only made things worse. The pounding turned into full-on kicks. The door shook with each impact. I yelled at Anna to lock herself in the bathroom, and she ran. Hunter and I rushed to the kitchen and grabbed knives, anything we could use if it came down to it. We stood there frozen, listening to him move around outside. Then everything went quiet for a second, and suddenly a window shattered. Glass exploded across the room as something heavy crashed through. I flinched, expecting him to climb in right after it, but he didn't. The silence that followed was suffocating. Seconds felt like minutes. My grip tightened around the knife as I stared at the broken window, waiting. Then, faint at first, I heard sirens. They grew louder, cutting through the forest noise. The moment they got close, the sounds outside stopped completely. No footsteps, no movement, nothing. By the time the police arrived, whoever had been out there was gone. They searched the area, shining lights into the trees, checking around the cabin. But they didn't find anything. No person, no clear trail. Just the broken window and our word against the darkness. Hunter argued with them, insisting the guy had been right there moments before. But it didn't matter. They told us the same thing over and over. They couldn't find anyone. Then they gave us advice that stuck with me. "Pack your things," one of them said, "and leave." We didn't hesitate. We threw everything together as fast as we could. None of us wanted to spend another second in that place. As we drove away, the cabin disappeared behind the trees almost instantly, like it had never been there at all. The adrenaline slowly faded as we got farther from the woods, but the feeling didn't, because the more I thought about it, the less it made sense. That cabin was in the middle of nowhere, You wouldn't just stumble across it by accident. Whoever that man was, he knew exactly where we were. And that's the part that never left me. He didn't find us. He was already there. It was my senior year of college, and spring break wasn't something we debated. It was automatic. Every year, our fraternity organized a massive trip, and that time the destination was Acapulco. Within weeks, nearly 40 of us had booked rooms at the same resort, along with a few sorority groups we were close with. It was the kind of trip people talked about all year: sun, parties, no responsibilities. Looking back, it's wild how none of us really thought about where we were going or what could go wrong. We just assumed nothing would. One of the most unforgettable people on that trip was my friend Sahil. He had this energy that filled every room. Funny, loud, impossible to ignore. But he also had zero sense of limits. If there was a bad decision to be made, Sahil would somehow find it. It wasn't that he wanted trouble, he just didn't think about consequences in the moment. That's what made him exciting and dangerous in the wrong situation. A few nights into the trip, a group of us decided to hit one of the biggest clubs in the area. The place was overwhelming. Music blasting through your chest, lights flashing nonstop, people packed wall to wall. It felt like controlled chaos. At first, everything was normal. We were drinking, laughing, moving through the crowd together. It was exactly what we expected. Then Sahil started drifting. I noticed him scanning the room, watching people like he was looking for something. Eventually, he leaned over and said he wanted to find someone who could get him something stronger. The second he said it, I told him no. We all did. We were in a foreign country, surrounded by strangers, and nothing about that idea felt safe. He nodded like he understood, but I knew he didn't. For a while, we kept an eye on him, but the club was huge. People kept splitting off and coming back together. At some point, Sahil disappeared into the crowd. At first, it didn't feel like a big deal. He'd done that before. We figured he'd show up again. But as time passed, something started to feel off. We tried calling him, straight to voicemail, again and again. His phone was dead, and that didn't make sense. The mood shifted fast. What started as a fun night turned into something tense. After waiting longer than we should have, we decided to leave and head back to the resort, hoping he'd already made it there. Outside, the streets were packed, so we walked a little further to find a ride. It was around 1 a.m., and the farther we got from the club, the quieter and darker it became. That's when we saw him. He was stumbling toward us out of the darkness. At first, I didn't even recognize him. Then the light hit his face and my stomach dropped. It was Sahil, but barely. His shirt was torn, his face swollen and bruised, his lips split open. He was limping, struggling to stay upright. We ran to him, catching him before he fell. He kept saying he was fine, but it was obvious something serious had happened. We got him back to the resort as fast as we could. Once we were inside, we sat him down and started asking questions. It took a minute, but eventually he started talking. He said he found a guy near the bar who didn't speak much English, along with another guy who acted as a translator. He told them what he was looking for, and they seemed to understand. Even though something felt off, he ignored it. Then the guy offered him a small sample. Sahil tried it, and just like that, his judgment was gone. They told him they couldn't do business inside and asked him to step outside. He knew it was a bad idea, but he went anyway. As soon as they got out, there was a car waiting. Before he could react, they grabbed him and forced him inside. The car took off immediately. They went through his pockets, took everything, his phone, his wallet, and when he tried to fight back, they beat him until he stopped resisting. At some point during the drive, one of them asked why there were so many Americans in the city. Without thinking, Sahil told them about us, the group, the resort, how many people were there. The two men started talking in Spanish and something changed. A few minutes later, the car slowed down, pulled over, and they threw him out onto the side of the road. No warning, no explanation, just gone. He lay there for a moment, alone, injured, with no idea where he was. Then he got up and started walking. He didn't know which direction to go, so he just picked one and kept moving. Somehow, by pure luck, he ended up heading back toward the main area. And that's when we found him. We never went to the police. It didn't feel like an option. We were in a foreign country, dealing with something we didn't understand. So we kept it quiet. To everyone else, the trip went on like nothing happened. But for us, that night stayed with us. because it wasn't just a bad decision. It was a reminder of how fast things can go wrong and how sometimes the only thing that saves you is luck. It was my senior year of college, and spring break wasn't something we debated. It was automatic. Every year, our fraternity organized a massive trip, and that time the destination was Acapulco. Within a few weeks, nearly 40 of us had booked rooms at the same resort, along with a few sorority groups we were close with. It was the kind of trip people talked about all year. Sun, parties, no responsibilities, no consequences. At least that's what we told ourselves. Looking back, it's strange how none of us stopped to think about where we were going or what could realistically happen in a place we didn't understand. We just assumed we were untouchable as long as we were together. One of the most unforgettable people on that trip was my friend Sahil. He had this energy that pulled people in instantly. Funny, loud, confident in a way that made everything feel more exciting. But he also had no sense of limits. If there was a risky decision to make, Sahil wouldn't hesitate. It wasn't that he was reckless on purpose, he just didn't process consequences in the moment. He lived entirely in the present, chasing whatever felt good right then. Most of the time it made for great stories. But in the wrong environment, with the wrong people, it was exactly the kind of mindset that could get someone into serious trouble. A few nights into the trip, a group of us decided to go out to one of the biggest clubs in the city. The moment we walked in, it felt overwhelming in the best way. Music pounding so loud it vibrated through your chest, lights flashing in every direction, bodies packed so tight you could barely move without brushing into someone. It was chaotic, loud, and intoxicating. At first, everything was normal. We stuck together, grabbing drinks, laughing, shouting over the music. It felt like the kind of night that would blur into memory later. Nothing more than another wild story. But after a while, I noticed Sahil starting to change. He wasn't really engaged with us anymore. Instead, he kept scanning the room, watching people closely like he was searching for something specific. Eventually, he leaned over and said he was trying to find someone who could get him something stronger than what we were drinking. The second he said it, I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. I told him immediately to drop it. A couple of the others backed me up. We were in a foreign country, surrounded by strangers, and none of us spoke the language. There were too many unknowns, too many ways that could go wrong. Sahil nodded, gave a half smile, then said he got it. But I knew that look. He wasn't done. For a while we tried to keep an eye on him, subtly making sure he stayed within view. But the club was enormous, and people kept shifting, moving, breaking apart, and coming back together. At some point, without any of us noticing exactly when, Sahil disappeared into the crowd. At first it didn't feel unusual. He'd done that before. Wander off, meet new people, come back later like nothing happened. We assumed it was the same thing this time. But as time passed, something started to feel off. Someone eventually asked where Sahil was, and that's when it hit us. We hadn't seen him in a while. We pulled out our phones and started calling him, straight to voicemail. Again and again. His phone was off. That didn't make sense. Sahil was obsessive about his phone. It was always charged, always on him. The longer we stood there without hearing back from him, the heavier the air felt. The energy shifted from mild concern to something sharper, something uneasy that none of us wanted to say out loud. After waiting longer than we should have, we decided to leave the club and head back toward the resort. The streets outside were crowded with people trying to get rides, shouting, pushing, chaos spilling out from the club into the night. We walked a little farther down the road to find a quieter spot where we could call a car. It was around 1 in the morning, and the further we moved away from the noise, the darker and more isolated it felt. That's when we saw someone stumbling toward us out of the distance. At first, I didn't recognize him. His movement was uneven, almost collapsing forward with every step. But as he got closer and the streetlight caught his face, everything in me dropped. It was Sahil, but he didn't look like himself. His shirt was torn nearly off, hanging loosely from one shoulder. His face was swollen, bruises already forming, his lips split open. He was limping badly, barely able to stay upright. We ran to him, grabbing him before he fell. He kept saying he was fine, but his voice didn't match what we were seeing. Something had gone very wrong. We got him into a car and back to the resort as fast as we could. The entire ride, no one really spoke. The silence felt heavy. like we all understood this wasn't just some random fight. Once we got him into one of the rooms, we sat him down and started asking questions. At first, he didn't want to talk. He just kept shaking his head, saying he'd explain later. But eventually, after a few minutes, he gave in. He told us he found a guy near the bar, a short man who didn't speak much English, and another man who acted as a translator. He told them what he was looking for, and they seemed to understand immediately. He admitted something felt off right away, especially about the translator, but he ignored it. Then the man pulled out a small sample and offered it to him right there. Sahil tried it. He said it was good, and that was all it took. Whatever hesitation he had disappeared in that moment. They told him they couldn't do business inside and asked him to step outside. He knew it was a bad idea. He said that himself, but he still went. As soon as they got outside, there was a car waiting. Before he could fully process what was happening, they grabbed him and forced him into the back seat. The doors slammed shut, and the car took off immediately. That's when everything shifted from a bad decision to something much worse. While the car was moving, they went through his pockets, taking everything: his phone, his wallet, anything valuable. When he tried to resist, they beat him hard enough to make him stop. Not just once. They kept going until he gave up. He said the entire time he had no idea where they were taking him or what they planned to do next. The city lights faded, and all he could think was that he had just made a mistake he couldn't undo. Then in the middle of it, one of them asked him a question: why there were so many Americans in the city. Without thinking, Sahil answered. He told them about us, the group, the resort, how many people were there. Dozens of us, all staying in one place. He didn't realize it in that moment, but that answer changed everything. The two men started talking to each other in Spanish, their tone shifting. A few minutes later, the car slowed down. It pulled over on a dark stretch of road. Without warning, they opened the door and shoved him out. He hit the ground hard, disoriented, injured, and before he could react, the car drove off into the night. He lay there for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. No phone, no money, no idea where he was. Then he forced himself up. Every step hurt, but he started walking anyway. He didn't know which direction to go, so he picked one and kept moving, hoping it would lead somewhere familiar. By pure luck, it did. He eventually made his way back toward the main area, and that's when we found him. Sitting there listening to him tell the story, it hit all of us at once how close it had been to something much worse. We never went to the police. It didn't feel like an option. To everyone else, the trip went on like nothing happened. But for us, that night stayed burned into memory, because it proved how fast things can go wrong, and how sometimes survival comes down to nothing more than luck. What makes all of this worse is how close it came to going completely differently. One door opening, one wrong answer. One step further than they already took. And none of these stories would have ended the same way. That's the part people don't think about. It's not always about what happened. It's about how easily it could have been worse. Because in every single one of these situations, they weren't in control. Someone else was. Someone watching, someone waiting, someone deciding what happens next. And the only reason you're hearing these stories right now is because somehow they got lucky. Not smart, not prepared. Lucky. So next time you're somewhere unfamiliar, next time something feels even slightly off, don't ignore it, because sometimes that feeling is the only warning you get. If this made you think, even for a second, hit like. Share this with someone who always says that would never happen to me, because one day it might, and they won't be ready.